For 2 years, the Don's men laughed at the fat lady barber who shaved the most dangerous throat in the city. And the day someone finally came to cut that throat, the fat lady barber was the only person alive who could feel that the blade in the room was wrong. Let me set it for you. Pratt's, my father's shop, mine now, a real old barber shop on a corner that's outlived everything around it. One chair that matters, a strop on the wall, a row of straight razors my father honed for 30 years, the smell of bay rum and hot towels. And for 2 years, 6 days a week, the most feared man in the city had sat in my chair and let me lay a straight razor against his throat and take 2 days of beard off him while his bodyguards stood against the wall and pretended not to feel how strange it was, that the Don who trusted no one trusted the big woman with the blade. Because that's the thing about a straight razor shave that people forget. It is the most defenseless a man ever is. Throat bared, eyes closed, a sharpened blade in someone else's hand. There is no greater trust one person can hand another. And Augusto Castellano handed it to me 6 days a week, and his men hated it, and they made their jokes, and not one of them understood that the woman they were laughing at held their boss's life in her hand every single morning and had never once let it slip. The day it happened, there was a new man in my shop. He'd come in with the Don's crew a few times that week. A quiet one, said he was a barber from the old country, said he'd trained in Sicily, hung around the second chair like he was angling to work it. The men liked him. He laughed at their jokes. He'd even offered, twice, to give Lou a hand with the Don's shave, and the men thought that was generous, and I thought it was strange, because a barber knows another barber the way a musician knows another musician, and this one was wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. And that morning, when the Don settled into my chair, and I wrapped the hot towel and turned to strop my blade, the new man stepped up smooth and easy and said, "Let me take this one, Lou. Give your arm a rest," and reached for a razor. My razor, and the men chuckled, and the Don, half asleep under the towel, made a small sound that meant he didn't care who did it. And every hair on my body stood up, because I watched the new man pick up a razor, and he held it wrong. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone but a barber would ever catch, but a straight razor lives in your hand a particular way after years. The grip, the angle of the wrist, the little habits of someone who has truly done 10,000 shaves, and this man held it like a man who had practiced looking like a barber but had never spent a winter learning the throat. His thumb was wrong on the shank, and worse, much worse, it wasn't one of my razors. He'd palmed his own blade into my shop, a blade I'd never honed, never seen, and was reaching to lay it against the bared throat of the most dangerous man in the city while that man's eyes were closed under my towel. I knew, the way I know my own hands, that the man about to shave Don Augusto Castellano had never shaved anyone in his life, and had brought his own steel to do it. And there was no time and no way to announce it. Shout, "That man's an assassin," in a room of armed men, and the assassin simply finishes the half-second of work he came to do while everyone's still turning. So I didn't shout. I did the most natural thing in my own shop, the thing a particular fussy barber does 100 times a day. I stepped in, light and bossy, and I put my hand on the new man's wrist. "No, no, not like that, and not with that thing. You'll tear him up. Give it here," the way a senior barber correcting a junior would, the most ordinary scolding in the world. And I took the strange blade out of his hand, and I set it down out of his reach, and I put my own honed razor back in my own hand, and I stepped between him and the chair, and I said, "Easy, I do the Don myself. Always have." And Don Augusto Castellano opened his eyes under the towel. He'd felt it, the change in the air, the particular note in my voice he'd learned over 2 years of mornings. And he looked up at me, and then at the new man standing there with empty hands and a face that had just gone wrong, and then at the strange razor lying where I'd set it. And the most dangerous man in the city understood, in about 2 seconds, that the fat barber his men laughed at had just put her hand between his bared throat and a stranger's blade. My name is Louisa Pratt, Lou, and to tell you what happened after he opened his eyes, I have to tell you about the 2 years he trusted me with, the thing he trusted no one else with, and the men who never understood why. My name is Louisa Pratt, Lou to everyone since I was a kid sweeping my father's floor, and I'm 40 years old, and I'm a big woman, and I am the best straight razor shave in this city, which is a thing the city has a great deal of trouble believing when it looks at me. I run Pratt's. My father opened it, my father taught me, and when his hands started to shake too bad to hold a blade, I took the chair, and when he died, I took the shop. A real barber shop, not a salon, not a grooming lounge, a barber shop, with a striped pole my granddad bolted up and a row of razors older than me and a clientele of men who've been getting their necks shaved on that corner for 50 years. The hot towel straight razor shave is a dying art, and I am one of the last people in this city who does it the true way, and I'm better at it than anyone left, and I say that not to brag but because it is simply, measurably true, the way it's true that a blacksmith knows iron. Here's what civilians don't understand about my work, and it's the thing the whole story turns on. A shave is trust. When a man lies back in my chair and I tip his head and lay a honed razor against the big vein in his throat, he is handing me his life for 15 minutes, completely, and the only thing between him and the end of everything is my hands and my care. I have shaved frightened men and powerful men and men with prices on their heads, and the thing they all learn in my chair is that they are safe, that I have never nicked a throat in 20 years, that my hands do not shake, that I treat the vulnerable thing they've handed me like the sacred thing it is. The Don's men never got it. To them I was a punchline, the fat lady playing Barber, gallo types, the muscle, the kind of men who measure everything and find women like me beneath the measuring. Careful, boss, she might mistake your neck for a sandwich. Hey Lou, the chair gonna hold up under all that reaching? The new one, before I knew what he was, fit right in. That was part of his cover, the easy cruelty that the crew read as belonging. I let it run off me the way I let the lather rinse down the drain, because the work is the work, and the work is mine, and a man who jokes about my body while I hold a blade to his boss's throat is a man who has not thought through who, in that room, actually has the power. It mostly washes off. Not always. There are nights, sweeping up the day's hair the way I did when I was 8, when the jokes pool up in my chest, like water in a clogged sink. But you cannot make me feel small in my own shop, where I am the one holding the blade. You can laugh all you like. I'm the one who knows that the hard man in my chair has a tremor he hides from his crew, because I feel it under my fingers when I tilt his chin. I'm the one who can tell, blind, the difference between a razor honed this week and one honed last month, by the drag of it through stubble. My hands know more about the men in that room than the men know about themselves. That's not nothing. That is a kind of power the comfortable never see coming, because they're too busy laughing to notice who's holding the steel. I just never thought the knowing would be worth a man's life. I thought it was a private mastery I kept for my own pride. I didn't know it was going to put me, one ordinary morning, the only person in the room who could feel that the blade had come to kill. Don Augusto Castellano. I knew 2 of him, and they didn't match, and the not matching is the whole story. There was the one the city knew, the name people said behind their teeth, the man whose business you did not ask about, whose stillness made hard men go quiet. Past 50, broad, iron gray, a face like a closed ledger. People arranged themselves carefully around him. That was the Augusto the world had. The one I had came to my chair at 7 in the morning, 6 days a week, and made himself defenseless on purpose, and let me see the man under the name. Because you cannot lie to your barber. Not over 2 years of mornings. I learned his face the way you learn a landscape, the scar under his jaw he never explained, the way the iron stillness loosened a few degrees under a hot towel, the rare mornings he was tired in a way he'd never let his men see. He talked to me the way men talk to barbers, which is to say more honestly than they talk to almost anyone, because there's something about a warm towel and a patient blade that loosens a man's tongue. He told me about his mother's hands. He asked about my father, and listened. Once, when a winter flu had me shaking, he wouldn't let me near his throat. "Go home, Lou. I'll grow a beard for a week. I'm not having you faint on my carotid." And he'd sent his own car to take me, and paid me as if I'd worked. The most dangerous man in the city, looking after his barber. And he trusted me. That was the whole thing, the thing his men could never stomach. In a life where trust gets you killed, Augusto Castellano closed his eyes in my chair 6 days a week and bared his throat to my blade, and never once flinched, because somewhere in the first months he had decided, a man who decides such things carefully, that my hands were the safest place in his whole dangerous world. "You're the only one I let near my throat," he told me once. Easy, like it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was everything. It was the most a man like that can say. So I'll say the embarrassing thing. Somewhere in 2 years of 7 a.m. mornings, I let myself be a little in love with the man who trusted me with his throat, with the loosening of the iron under the towel, with "You're the only one I let near my throat," with the one person who handed me the sacred vulnerable thing and never took it back. I knew what he was. I knew the scar and the stillness were paid for in a coin I didn't ask about. I let myself love the 7 a.m. man anyway, in the privacy of my shop after the lights were off, the way you warm your hands at a fire you know could burn the house down. I never said it. A woman like me, a man like that, it wasn't a fantasy. It was a joke I refused to tell myself out loud. What I didn't know was that someone had finally understood the one true thing about Augusto Castellano, that the most guarded man in the city had exactly one moment, every morning, when he was completely defenseless, eyes shut, throat bared, in a barber's chair. You cannot get a gun near a man like that, but a razor is already there, so they didn't send a shooter, they sent a barber, a man with a plausible story and a stolen trade and his own blade, to do, in the one unguarded minute of the dawn's day, what no gun could get close enough to do. It was clever. It was nearly perfect. They had thought of everything except the one thing no one ever thinks of, the fat woman whose chair it was, and whose entire life was knowing exactly how a blade should sit in a real barber's hand. It started, that week, as a wrongness I couldn't name, the way you sense a note is flat before you can say which one. The new man said all the right things. Trained in Sicily, family trade, looking for a chair. The crew bought it whole. But a barber knows a barber, and from the first day this one set off something low and certain in me. His hands were too clean, not clean like careful, clean like a man whose hands had never spent 20 years in lather and hot water and the particular wear of the work. He didn't strop right. He went through the motions, but a real barber loves the strop, knows it like an instrument, and this man used it like a man who'd watched a video. He didn't know where things lived in a shop without looking, little things. Nothing the crew would ever see. Everything a barber would. And then that morning, I watched him pick up a razor to take the Don's throat, and the low, certain wrongness became a scream. Because he held it wrong. A straight razor, held by someone who's truly done the work, sits in the hand a specific way. The tang between the right fingers, the thumb on the shank, the wrist loose and ready to roll the angle. This man gripped it like a man holding a razor for a photograph, stiff, thumb wrong. The grip of someone who had practiced the look in a mirror and never once felt a real man's pulse jump under the edge. And then I saw the blade itself, and the bottom dropped out of me, because it was not one of mine. I know every razor in my shop the way you know your own teeth with your tongue. This was a stranger's steel, palmed in, brought to my shop for one purpose, because you don't bring your own razor to a shave unless the razor is the point. And every road led to a wall. I couldn't shout, "Assassin!" The second I made it a scene, he'd do the half-second of work he came for while the room was still turning, and the Don's eyes were closed and his throat was already bared. I couldn't reach the Don's men, who were 3 steps away and would read a fat barber lunging at their new friend as exactly the wrong thing. I had one move, and it was the move my whole life had trained into me, the fussy, bossy, utterly ordinary authority of a senior barber in her own shop, correcting a junior who's doing it wrong. The most boring thing in the world. The one thing that could take the blade out of his hand without a single person, not the crew, not the killer, understanding that anything at all had just happened. I had maybe 3 seconds before that strange blade touched the Don's skin. I made my hands calm, the same trick my father taught me at this chair. You don't think about the throat, you think about the stroke. And I stepped in with the comfortable irritation of a woman who has run this shop for 20 years and will not have a shave done sloppy under her roof. No, no, not like that, and God, not with that thing. You'll shred him. I said it the way I'd say it to any cocky kid at the second chair, light and bossy and bored, and I put my hand flat on the new man's wrist, firm, a barber's correcting grip, and I took the strange razor right out of his fingers before he'd decided whether to let me, because the boldness of the ordinary is that no one expects it. I set the blade down on the far counter, out of his reach. I picked my own honed razor back up, and I planted myself between the new man and my chair, square, all of me, the body they'd been laughing at for 2 years suddenly a wall, and I said, easy as anything, I do the Don myself, always have. House rule. The new man stood there with his empty hand still half raised, and his face did a thing faces do when a plan dies. A flicker, fast, gone. And in that flicker, I saw I'd been right, and I saw that he saw I knew. And Augusto Castellano opened his eyes. He'd heard it, 2 years of my voice every morning, and he knew the difference between Lou being bossy and Lou being something else, and this was something else. He looked up at me, calm, and read my face, which I held very still and let him read. Then he looked at the new man with the empty hand. Then at the strange razor on the far counter, the one that wasn't mine, that no one had any reason to bring, and I watched the iron come back into him all at once, fully awake now, and he sat up unhurried in my chair and said, mild as the morning, to his men, take our new friend somewhere we can talk, and bring his razor. And the crew's laughter died as they finally understood, a beat behind their boss, that the joke barber had just caught something they'd let walk in the door. I saw the edges of it, the new man's arms taken gently, the strange blade bagged, the door, and then they were gone, and the Don was still in my chair, and I never saw the new man again. No shout, no blood in my shop, just a blade that never touched a throat, and the most dangerous man in the city, sitting up alive because his barber knew how a razor should sit in an honest hand. I thought that was the end of my part. Catch it quiet, say nothing, finish the shave. It wasn't. Because in that world there's an arithmetic, and Gallo, the Don's own muscle, the loudest of the laughers, came back to my shop that night to do the math out loud at me. He didn't shout. He leaned on my chair, on my father's chair, and turned one of my razors over in his big hand and said, funny thing this morning. Real funny. Almost like you knew. And the thing is, Lou, a woman who can spot a planted man when 6 of us couldn't, that's a woman who sees too much, makes people nervous, makes them wonder what else she sees, who she might tell. He set the razor down wrong, the way a man does to show he doesn't care about your things. You'd be smart to forget you can read a razor, real smart. Maybe think about retiring the chair somewhere far, before somebody retires it for you. And I stood there, 40 years old, the best hands in the city, and understood the reward for saving a man might be losing everything my father built. I didn't hear the door, neither did Gallo. 1 second it was him and his threat and my father's chair between us. The next, there was a third voice in my shop, low and even, and without a single degree of mercy. Gallo, put down her razor and step back. I watched the loudest man in the crew go small. He turned, hands opening. Boss, I was just, she's a liability, she sees everything. I was protecting the, she saw what 6 of you missed. Augusto crossed my shop slow and came and stood beside my chair. Beside me? On my side of it, where none of them had ever stood. A man came into this room with a stolen trade and his own blade to open my throat while my eyes were closed, and every one of you saw a friend. She felt it in how he held the steel, and she took it out of his hand so smooth, not one of you knew a thing had happened. She put her own body between me and a blade and asked me for nothing. A pause I felt in my teeth. So understand me, and tell the others, she is the only one who touches my throat, the only one. That is not going to change. Nobody touches me. Her? Not her, not this shop, not a hair, or I will assume it was one of mine, and I will be very thorough about which. Are we clear? Gallo was clear. Gallo was so clear he couldn't leave fast enough, and I never had trouble from him or anyone again, because by the next week, every soul in that world knew the fat barber at Pratt's was the most protected pair of hands in the city. And it changed everything, and I have to be honest about the cold under the warmth, because it's the part that matters most. For 2 years I'd been invisible, a joke, furniture with a razor, and lonely as that was, it was mine. Now I was visible, as his. The Don's barber, the one who caught the blade, the lucky fat woman the Don put his hand over. Men who'd laughed at me for 2 years now, nodded careful when they passed my pole, the way you nod at something a dangerous man keeps. And I stood in my father's shop, suddenly safe, suddenly seen, and felt a brand new cold, because I had earned my chair with 20 years of my own steady hands, and I did not finally get respected in order to become a thing a powerful man owns. Being a man's trusted barber is not the same as being your own woman, and I had not honed my whole life to the edge of a real art to end up as the prize blade in his collection. He came back, after, alone, near close, when the pole was off and the towels were folded. He didn't sit in the chair like a customer, he stood by it, and he turned his hat in his hands, this Iron Man turning his hat, and he said, I keep turning a question I can't answer, so I've come to ask you. You owed me nothing. You could have let him take the shave, and looked away, and been perfectly safe, and instead you put your hand and your body between me and a blade, and then you asked me for nothing. Everyone in my life wants something, Lou. You never have. Why? And I should have been smart and said anyone would have. Instead, 2 years of 7 a.m. mornings came up my throat at once, and I told him the truth. Because you weren't a stranger to me, I said. That's what you've got wrong. For 2 years you handed me your throat 6 mornings a week, the one thing you trust no one with. And you let me see the man under the name, and you sent me home in your own car when I was sick, and you said I was the only one you let near your throat. Do you know what that is? To a woman the whole world treats as a joke with a razor? You're the one person who ever trusted me with something sacred and never took it back. So no, I didn't save a stranger. I saved the only man who ever trusted me all the way. And I'd have done it if it cost me the shop, and I don't want anything for it. And that's exactly why I can't be what they're all whispering now. Your barber, your lucky hands, your kept blade. I won't be a thing you own, even a thing you love. I've been a useful pair of hands my whole life. I'd rather go back to being the joke with the razor than be the finest tool in your shop. I have never watched an Iron Man come so undone. He stood in my shop, the most dangerous man in the city, and looked at me like I'd laid a warm towel over something that had been cold in him for 30 years. "You think I came to keep you," he said, like a good razor. "A breath, Lou. For 2 years you've been the only place in my whole life I lay down my guard. The 1 minute a day I'm not afraid, and I told myself that was just a good shave. And then you stepped between me and a blade, while 6 men I pay stood frozen, and I understood I'd been a coward about the truest thing in my life. I don't want to own you. I want to lay my guard down with you on purpose, in the daylight, where it isn't a shave, where it's a choice. You've held my throat safe for 2 years. Let me be the one who's careful with you for once." It would be a lovely place to stop. The Iron Man undone, the mocked woman finally trusted. But I've stood on the working side of the chair my whole life, and I know exactly how fast being trusted by a powerful man becomes being kept by one. Today I'm the miracle with the steady hands. What am I in a year, when the gratitude wears thin and I'm just a big woman, a dangerous man set up in a nicer shop? I would not trade earning my edge myself for being prized and owned. They are closer to the same blade than anyone admits. So I told him my terms, across my father's chair, because the chair was the truth of us. "If you mean it," I said, "here's how it goes. Pratt's stays mine and my hands stay mine. I shave who I choose because it's my father's shop and my trade, not because you allow it. You still sit in my chair as a man who books like anyone else, and you don't buy me a finer shop or make me your private barber kept behind a locked door. You don't decide things for me to keep me safe. You ask me like I'm a woman with a say in her own life. And if you want to know me, you come to this shop in the daylight, when the pole's spinning and the whole street can see, and you court me like a woman worth being seen with. Slow, in the open, no power, no money, no grand gestures. And the day you treat me like a thing you own, even a thing you love, the chair's closed to you, and I go back to my regulars, and I'll be fine, because I had the best hands in the city long before you ever sat in my chair." He didn't argue. That's how I knew it was real. A man who wanted to own me would have argued, would have bought me a marble shop to skip the earning. Augusto Castellano just looked at me a long moment, and then the corner of his mouth did the thing it only did under a hot towel, went soft, almost shy, and he said, "Those are hard terms. They're the only ones I've got." "Good," he said. "I've spent my whole life with people who gave me the easy shave," and he set his hat down on the arm of my chair like a man laying down a marker he meant to keep. "I'll see you at 7, Lou Pratt, in the chair, while it's still yours. So here's where I am now, if you want to know. The shop's still mine, my father's name still on the glass, my hands still my own, and I shave who I please. I kept the dawn as a 7 a.m. regular because I'm not in the business of throwing away a man who finally learned how to ask, but on my terms, in my chair, with the pole spinning where the street can see. He comes in the daylight now too, not for a shave, just to sit and talk, and let me see him be a man and not a name, and he has not once tried to keep me, or cage me, or own me," he asks. He's slow at it, a hard man learning a gentle thing late, and watching him be careful and humble and uncertain with a big woman the world made a joke of. That, it turns out, is the only kind of being trusted I ever wanted. I won't tell you it's simple. He is what he is, and his world is what it is, and there are nights I lock the shop and wonder what I've sharpened myself toward. But I know this much. I spent 20 years mastering the most trusting art there is, and the one morning it counted, the fat barber was the only one who could feel the blade was wrong. And then I had the harder courage, which was to refuse to let saving him cost me the trade and the self that were mine. For 2 years, his men laughed at the fat lady Barber, and the fat lady Barber was the only one who could feel the killing blade, and then the only one brave enough to keep her own chair instead of becoming the prize in his. So if you or me, felt what no one else could, saved his life with a barber's hands, set your terms, and watched the most dangerous man in the city actually try to meet them, would you let him into your life and keep it the chair? Or would you decide some throats are safer never bared and show him the door? Tell me below. And if you've ever been the one they laugh at for being good at something they don't think belongs to you, the joke with the razor, the master nobody respects, hear the only thing I know for sure now. Being underestimated is not the same as being lesser. Sometimes it just means you're the only one in the room who actually knows how the blade should sit. And one day that might be the thing that saves a life, maybe even your own. Before you leave the chair, if Lou's story steadied something in you tonight, there's one small thing you can do. On your YouTube app, there's a hype button right below this video. Tap it, pick your points, 3 free every week, and this story reaches someone who hasn't sat down with it yet. It's a steady hand, one tap, and the right person will feel it.